All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited today to be talking about AI overviews and AI search visibility. I'm sure we will have some people kind of trickling in as we get started. So I will kind of give us a minute there, but thank you all for joining. Hopefully it should be a great session. So as people are trickling in, I will just give a quick introduction of myself and Nexus. So my name is Jenny Russ. I am a client solutions manager at Nexus Marketing. We are a digital marketing agency based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and we specialize in inbound lead generation and SEO for businesses that are selling into mission-driven industries. So selling into typically the nonprofit space, healthcare, education, and association are our biggest verticals. Thinking about our clients, how our clients' prospects are finding them online and figuring out kind of how we get them in front of the right people online is what we do all day, every day. And AI is increasingly a really big part of that. So super excited to be chatting. I think we have some current clients on the call today, as well as, probably some people who aren't familiar with us. So hopefully that was a good kind of overview introduction. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into the content. We do have another Nexus team member who is on the webinar to help with logistics. So if you are running into any technical issues or need anything, please feel free to message them. You can find them under Nexus Marketing. So feel free to send questions their way if you need assistance. We will have some time at the end of the session for a Q&A. So please submit your questions via the questions feature at the bottom of your screen, or of course you can leave them in the chat as well that our team will be kind of monitoring, and we can take some questions at the end. You're of course welcome if you've got comments throughout that you want to share with the group. Please feel free to use the chat for that as well. All right, it is 1:02, so hopefully those who are joining us live are here. Those who are not joining live and watching the recording, welcome as well. But let's go ahead and get things started. So before getting into AI overviews, I think it would be helpful for us to take a bit of a step back and look at the modern SERP more generally. As we all know, the days of Google just spitting out 10 blue links and nothing else is far behind us. Those days are far behind us. Nowadays, there are dozens of different SERP features that can appear on page one of Google. So you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. Every SERP is going to look a little different. And now, of course, you add AI overviews into that mix, and it's a game changer. It's something that we've got to be prepared for. It is happening now. It's likely to change more in the future. And so it's something that we need to be thinking about if we want to maintain an effective organic digital presence. So looking at kind of traditional Google Search Console metrics, so your clicks, your impressions, click-through rate, average position, that is really still the basis of what we are looking at day in, day out. It's what you should be monitoring. It's what you should be tracking. But they don't give a great insight yet. Who knows where those tools might land eventually, but they don't give a great insight yet into AI overviews and kind of the impact of AI overviews. So it's important that we look, a little beyond kind of that surface level. So when we're looking at Search Console data, I think of this as kind of two categories. We've got what actually happened and then what we can derive from that evidence. So for example, we've got average position, and then from that we derive impressions. We've got clicks. We then use that plus impressions to derive click-through rate. What a lot of people have been seeing over the last few years is a decrease in clicks. And traditional metrics don't really tell the story of why that is necessarily. Certainly it tells the story of kind of what is happening, but not necessarily that why. And a big piece of that is, a big increase in SERP features that divert eyeballs away from traditional content. I'd be curious to hear from those who are here live in the chat. Like, is that something you've been seeing? Is that a concern of yours? I think overall that is certainly a trend that a lot of people have seen across industries, but obviously different organizations see different things. So feel free to let us know kind of what you're seeing there, if you're seeing a decrease in clicks. But if we're thinking about where AI overviews are most likely to impact metrics, definitely clicks is really where we want to be paying attention, because that is where a lot of the disruption is happening. So when looking at a SERP with these additional features, the bottom line is there is just physically less room on the page for your traditional links, because a larger proportion of the screen is getting taken up by these specialized features. This draws attention away from traditionally ranking content, impacting CTR that we would normally expect to see with top results. An AI overview definitely falls into this category of visually distracting features that can divert searchers away from top results. So when we're looking at, I've lost my mouse here. There we go. So if we're looking at an actual AI overview, we've got a couple of different things that are going on. So first, we've got the actual AI generated answer that Google has provided, which typically comes with some additional key points below that summary. That can seriously look so different depending on what that query is, that's highly variable, but usually there's some sort of expanded information below that kind of quick top summary. And then over on the right, you've got a couple of links that are listed, and then typically the option to see more. So that can almost be thought of a little bit as kind of a SERP within the SERP, which content is being highlighted here for people to click through if they want. Something I do really want to emphasize here that we'll get into a little bit more later when we're looking at a study, but most of the links that are included in this AI overview kind of mini SERP on the right are being pulled from the top 12 positions of Google. So when we're thinking about what is the best way to make sure that your content is being referenced in AI overviews, performing well for traditional search is going to be that number one biggest factor, because that is where Google is pulling most of these links from. So since AI overviews are, they're newer, there's not a huge amount of data and research on their impact, but there are some great studies that I think are, kind of paving the way for some larger research here. So the team at Botify, they are an AI-based SEO analytics platform, conducted a study that I think highlights some really useful trends for us to look at. So, I've linked the study to the deck that will be shared after the session. So if anyone's interested, there's some stuff that I didn't highlight for this presentation, but a lot of great stuff in there. They looked at 120,000 keywords across 22 websites and used a mix of both commercial and informational keywords. So just some data there around kind of this study. Before diving into kind of the findings of this study, I do want to give a couple of quick, maybe disclaimers is the right word, just a couple of thoughts to kind of nuance how we think about this data. So the first is that, if you really want to understand the true impact of AI overviews on your specific business, you need to be looking at your brand's specific keyword landscape. This study certainly uses enough keywords to pull out some really useful overall trends, but you are always going to find better, more accurate, more valuable insights by doing your own research that is tailored to your industry and your audience. The second piece here is that global AI overview rollout isn't fully completed. It started with just a few key countries that included the United States. In the last 6 months, Google has expanded AI overviews into a bunch of other countries, but certainly not all of them yet. So something big to think about if you've got an international audience, that AI overviews may or may not be impacting them yet. And it's certainly not as prevalent in other areas where it is a newer feature and has been rolled out more recently. Lastly, the way that searchers respond to AI overviews across different markets can be highly diversified. So when we look at these overall trends, it is important to remember that these are just trends, and it'll be important, if this is something you really want to think about, to take a deeper dive again into how your specific customer base is interacting with some of these features. So just a couple of things to think about as we're looking at some of this data. So to dive in, Botify found that of the 120,000 keywords that they looked at, roughly half of them triggered AI overviews, about 47%. However, they also found that a strong majority of AI overviews appeared for informational keywords. To take kind of a closer look at the breakdown of keyword intent, commercial keywords were much, much less likely to trigger an AI overview compared to informational keywords. The good thing is that this is really aligned with how we have been talking with clients over the last 6 months, a year, as these things have been rolling out, around not overly catastrophizing dips in overall traffic due to AI overviews, especially if leads are still strong. We think about, with a lot of these top of funnel informational searches, if a searcher can have their entire query answered by a brief AI generated overview and then not feel any need to do kind of any additional research, the odds that that was a person who was truly qualified, was in a buying mindset, and was going to actually convert into a lead for your business is pretty low. I think with featured snippets as well, similar story where, yes, a featured snippet is great. Yes, it can also highly impact click-through rate. But again, if someone can get what they're looking for just from a featured snippet, they probably weren't really qualified traffic. So as long as those leads are still strong and you still have a consistent flow of inbound leads through the website, looking at overall traffic, if there are dips, not something to be, overly concerned about, again, because, a lot of that traffic that you're quote unquote missing out on wasn't really qualified to begin with. The next thing we're going to look at is AI overviews broken down by keyword length. So I just wanted, as a quick note, this study defined keywords. So head keywords have 1 to 2 words, mid have 3 to 4, and then long tail keywords have 5 or more. So just for everyone's kind of reference, that's how this study defined those terms. So the overall picture here is that long tail keywords were much, much more likely to trigger an AI overview compared to head and mid keywords. If we think about what that actually looks like in practice, I think this makes total sense. Long tail keywords are typically more specific, and they can often be phrased in the form of a question. Both of those factors are going to make it easier for Google to spit out an AI-generated response that is going to be accurate, that's going to meet the search intent, that's going to be reasonable and relevant. For example, if we're thinking about maybe an example from the nonprofit space, someone who is Googling, what is a nonprofit CRM? That is pretty easy for Google to understand, that they are looking for a definition that is highly informational, pretty easy for them to spit out a short blurb about, a definition of a nonprofit CRM. Now, if you've got someone who is searching nonprofit CRM versus, like that term, nonprofit CRM, instead of say, what is a nonprofit CRM? The intent of that looks a little bit different and it's a little bit more murky. Someone who's searching that might be looking for a definition. They also might be looking for specific products or to evaluate specific vendors. And so those types of terms are less likely to trigger an AI overview just because the intent there is a little less clear to Google. So something to think about as you're looking at your own keyword strategy, developing your keyword strategy, looking at what you're already performing for, those longer tail keywords are much more likely to trigger an AI overview. Something to think about and to monitor as you're looking at your own performance. Lastly here, this kind of big last piece that I really want to highlight is the very strong correlation between which links are featured in AI overviews and which links appear on page 1 of Google. So 75% in this study, 75% of AI overview links came from position 12 or higher. For us, what that really means is that I touched on this earlier, but the best thing that you can do if you want your content to appear in AI overviews is to make sure that it's appearing on the first page of Google. Position 12, again, that kind of 10 to 12 range, maybe top of page 2, but in general, performing well organically is going to be the strongest influencing factor for your appearance in AI overview links. So if you're thinking about, what do I need to be doing? All of the good things that you're already doing for SEO, all of those strong SEO fundamentals, like that is really what matters. Improving your overall keyword performance of your content is also going to improve their visibility in these AI overviews. It is a really direct correlation there. Which is great for those of us who are already thinking about SEO. We do not have to reinvent the wheel here. A lot of it, what we're already doing is going to support that goal of appearing in the AI overviews. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk LLMs specifically and how they pull, spit out, digest content and how we can think about how your brands are performing for these LLMs. So a quick note, we get questions all the time, like, should I still invest in SEO? Is Google going away? Does Google even matter? I think there's a lot of buzz around that with AI. The truth of the matter is that Google is not going anywhere. It is by far and away still the most trafficked site on the internet. That is not going to change in the near future. However, ChatGPT and these other generative AI tools are gaining traction in the marketplace, and it would be silly and kind of short and very short-sighted not to be thinking about how those tools interact with your website, understand your content and your brand. Now is really the time as these tools are getting rolled out to be thinking about how they're going to impact the future of your marketing. Another big thing to note is that on their own, LLMs are not up to date. So I went and asked ChatGPT myself how up to date their LLM is. And it said that they were up to date as of June 2024, which is, now about 9 months ago. Now it did also highlight that it can pull more recent real-time information from the internet if that's needed. So what does that look like in practice? So in general, generative AI tools are kind of pre-trained on content. So a user will ask a question, the LLM will take its existing knowledge base and use that to answer that question. Now that can often lead to somewhat limited answers because it doesn't have, content that's less than 9 months old, right? That can really impact for some things. Of course, that's not going to impact some queries, but for a lot, that could have a big impact. So as LLMs have become more sophisticated, they're now able to use a process called retrieval augmented generation, RAG for short, it's a bit of a mouthful, to create better, more robust, more up-to-date answers by going and getting fresh content from Bing. So basically how this works, a user will ask a question, that query gets sent to Bing. the information from Bing gets pushed back to the LLM. The LLM will then use that information along with the information it already has and the knowledge it already has that it's been trained on to create an augmented answer that, does not just include the knowledge that it already had. So that's kind of how that works. And so when we're thinking about LLMs, like Bing really is that center of the universe. It's interesting when we talk about and think about traditional SEO, it is Google, Google, Google. They are the dominant player in the space. That's always who we're thinking about. That's the prevalent person. And so that's what we're thinking about. But Bing is the one that's powering all of these generative AI tools. And so it's really important to be thinking about not just how Google understands your content, but how Bing does as well. So how do we do that? The first, and in my opinion, the most important piece of the puzzle is making sure that you have really high quality, relevant content on your website. This is the absolute foundation of traditional SEO and the foundation of GEO, generative engine optimization. It's really important that your content is engaging. It's easy to understand. It uses conversational language that aligns with, how someone might actually respond to a query. That it incorporates data into content to help reinforce that brand trustworthiness. All really good best practices. This is really the core piece. If your content is crap, nobody's going to want to use it, whether that's Google or an LLM or Bing or whatever. So making sure that you've got really strong content is always going to be that first fundamental piece, at least in my opinion. Another best practice that I would highlight is having a really strong overall brand authority. Is your messaging consistent across your entire digital footprint, including your social media presence? Are you highlighting the expertise and experience of the team members that are contributing content to your website? Do you have social proof that speaks to the quality of your products or services, like customer reviews, certifications, other types of that social proof, testimonials, things like that? All of those things contribute to the overall perception of your brand and website by LLMs. The better an LLM can understand your brand, the more likely it is to cite your content and to cite that content correctly for relevant searches. So it's really important to make sure you've got that kind of strong brand across all your different areas. Next, we want to think about your website's crawl budget, which is basically how many pages on your website can search engines crawl in a day. We want to make sure that whether it's Bing or Google that is crawling your website, that they're finding your content really effectively. So you've got to make sure that your pages are indexable and that you're removing extraneous, unnecessary content so it's not clogging up your website. Putting your most important pages at the top of your website hierarchy is really valuable. Making sure that your pages load quickly is really valuable. So some of these more technical elements, again, can have a really big impact on your performance on Bing, which is going to impact your performance on LLMs. One thing that your team may not have thought about is schema markup. It's super, super helpful for LLMs. Schema markup is basically additional structured data that helps search engines understand different elements of your website. And so making sure that all your best content is tagged with the appropriate schema markup, that your organization schema markup has really comprehensive information about your business, like a description, contact information, your logo, things like that. It's going to help search engines, again, like Bing, like Google, understand your brand and differentiate it in search results. Lastly, search engines, they're regularly crawling the internet. They've got their bots that are crawling the internet at all times, but there's no guarantee how quickly they will index new content once it goes live. Could be a week after it goes live, could be multiple weeks, could be the next day. Like there's just no guarantee. And so the good thing is that you can submit your content directly to search engines to make sure that it gets indexed as quickly as possible. It's not going to get pulled if it's not getting indexed. So we've got to make sure that it's getting indexed, ideally as soon as it goes live, or as quickly after it goes live as it can be. For LLMs in particular, Bing is going to be the most important one. So pushing content directly to Bing is really valuable. But I would say that overall, it is just best practice to submit new content, especially, if it's content that's not necessarily meant to rank. There's lots of various reasons you might create a piece of content, maybe less important. But if the purpose of the piece is to drive leads via organic search, highly recommend submitting that content to indexing, regardless of the search engine, so that it can appear as quickly as possible in search results. Lastly, what I'd love to do is just share a little bit about, how our agency goes about evaluating and improving clients' AI visibility. So we have our own proprietary GEO scorecard where we look at more than 60 factors that impact AI visibility and basically grade our clients on how they perform for each of those individual factors. We then from there create, based on their performance, kind of a punch list almost of activities that we would recommend to improve their performance. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and I can pull up what that actually looks like. And y'all can kind of see what this scorecard looks like. Here we go. So let me I'm not sure, I'll zoom it in a little bit. So hopefully you can see, but we've got all of these different types of criteria that we're looking at, some that are more technical, some that are more around content, some that are more kind of general presence, social media, things like this. We then basically give a score for each one of these, and then based on that score, determine what's going to be needed to bring each factor kind of up to par there. If you are a current client, I know we have a couple of them that registered for the call. So if you are a current client, I would really highly recommend, if this is something you're interested in, talking to your account manager about how we can incorporate this into our work together. I think we've done this with a lot of clients so far, and I think it's something that a lot of people are worried about and thinking about. And of course, if you're not a Nexus client and this is something that is interesting to you, or if you've got questions or want to learn more about, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation about this and see kind of what this might look like specifically for your organization. Alrighty, so I know we are coming up on time. We've got a few minutes left for some questions. One, just want to say, a big thank you to everyone for attending. If you need to hop off right at 1:30 or now, thank you so much. It was great to have you. I will be sharing these slides after the event, so hopefully they can be a useful resource, but happy to stay on for a few extra minutes to take some questions as well. Yeah, okay, great question. A couple great questions from Peter. So one here on what are some examples of commercial keywords versus informational keywords? Great question. And I think that is going to look different versus, depending on each individual industry. So in general, we would consider an informational keyword something where someone is truly like looking to answer a question. Like they're not necessarily evaluating, they're not necessarily evaluating anything specifically. They've got a question, they need it answered. I don't know, what is the conversion between US shoe sizes and European shoe sizes? Like that would be highly informational. Commercial is more focused on like that buying element. So, if I were to look up like best running shoes, that would be much more commercial. That's suggesting that I'm not really asking a question, I'm more evaluating. The next step beyond that, right, might be like me searching up Nike Air Force Ones, like something much more specific. So that's kind of how we think about those types of keywords. I think for people in some of these industries, I think that like nonprofit CRM versus like what is a nonprofit CRM is a useful example there. One is really, you're just kind of looking for an answer to a question versus a commercial keyword where you might be looking at, evaluating features, products, like, different vendors there. So great question. Another great question around kind of what does the future of AI search and AI overviews look like? Kind of what is going to be happening in the next 12 to 18 months? I think that's a great question. And I think it's a little bit up in the air. I think as these platforms and as these AI tools become more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, more expansive, I think it is very possible that the trends we're seeing where, they're appearing much less for some of these commercial keywords might change. I could see, right, as those tools become more capable of answering slightly less clear search intent. That's certainly possible. I think overall, it's likely to see an increase in where we're seeing these. I think the big difference here is like people who are looking to purchase, like you're not going to be able to do that through an AI overview, or dear God, who knows? But, in general, like you can't do that through an AI overview. So thinking through how do we really effectively get in front of those people who really are ready to buy? They're not just looking to give, to read just like an overview. I think that is, really the big question. But, I think the big answer of what does the future of AI search look like, it's a little up in the air. It's hard to know. Our team, certainly, this is something that we are monitoring regularly, talking about regularly. I'd really recommend, if you're not already signed up for Search Engine Journal's newsletter, that's a really good resource. They put out a lot of great resources about, updates around AI, Google updates, things like that. It's a great resource for some more up-to-date information as well. Oh, a great question about like, what is an LLM? That basically just stands for a large language model. It is basically the technology that all of these generative AI tools are using. So that is like ChatGPT is built on an LLM. It comprehends large amounts of language. That's how it digests content. So when we talk about LLMs, like we're basically talking about like generative AI tools in general, but that's kind of the more specific term there. All right, I think that is all of, a question. Yes, so correct. So we had a question just confirming, yes, the top 12 on Google is what is feeding most into the AI answer presented. Absolutely. So the top 12 positions typically fall a little bit past page one. So typically with page one of Google, those search results, typically there are, it can depend a little bit on what features are there on the search engine results page, but in general, there are about 10 spots on that first page. So positions 11 and 12 would be like the first two results when you click over to that second page of results. So, overall, being on page one is going to be like the biggest determining factor. That is where most of those links are being pulled from, is those top 12 results. All righty. I think, I know we've gone a couple minutes over, but some great questions. I think, we can go ahead and wrap up unless anyone has any others that they'd like to add. Thank you so much for attending. Hopefully this was a useful session and, one of many to hopefully, continue to talk about as this continues to evolve, what AI is going to look like and how it's going to impact SEO and search. I will be sending out a follow-up email with these slides. The study that we talked about today will be linked. And of course, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me or the rest of the team. Happy to answer questions. I know this is a big, kind of ever-changing, a little scary topic when it comes to SEO. So we're thrilled. Thank y'all so much. I am going to let y'all go, but hope you have a great rest of y'all's day. And again, thank you for attending. Have a good one. Bye.